Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the 2023 Nanovic Forum lecture. My name is Clemens Sedmak and I serve as director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. Welcome all. A special word of welcome to our guest of honor, Mr. Prime Minister Mikuláš Dzurinda. Welcome. It is an honor to host you. Mr. Dzurinda's first visit to Notre Dame. And if we leave a good impression, he may come back. The impressive Mr. Dzurinda will be introduced by the amazing Peter Stastny, NHL All-Star and member of the Hockey Hall of Fame, world and European champion, and for 10 years member of the European Parliament for Slovakia from 2004 to 2014, and most importantly, a member of the Nanovic Institute Advisory Board. Welcome, Peter. Thank you so much for being here. As you all know, and you're all looking forward to that, we're having another special event this afternoon at 5 p.m. in McKenna Conference Centre, where the chair of our advisory board, Jane Hayden, and her husband Tom are hosting a panel of elite athletes under the title Resistance to Russian and Soviet Imperialism, in the words of the elite athletes of the day. This panel will feature, next to Peter Stastny, Dmitry Kristic, a longtime National Hockey League NHL player and Ukraine native who has joined the fight against Russia, Václav Nedomansky, the first Czech hockey player to defect to North America to play in the NHL, and Anton Stastny, a professional hockey player who defected from Czechoslovakia to Canada in 1980 to play 9 seasons for the NHL's Quebec Nordique, along with his brothers Peter and Marian. So I would also like to welcome Jane and Tom, Dimitri, Václav, and Anton as well. Thank you for being here. Tom, there's a reserved seat for you if you want to sing that. Welcome, colleagues, students, guests, friends, and friends-to-be. Before we begin, please allow me to point out 2 practicalities. Please do not forget to switch your electronic devices back on after the event. We do not want you to miss an important call. And then we are video recording the lecture today. Mr. Prime Minister will be taking questions at the end. To ensure that your questions can be heard in the recording, we will ask you to please use the microphones that will pass around. This is our Nanovic Forum Lecture 2023. The Nanovic Forum is the annual signature event of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. It deepens Notre Dame's connections to Europe by bringing distinguished guests to campus to explore, discuss, and debate the most pressing questions about Europe today. The Nanovic Forum lecture series is a particular gift of Robert and Elizabeth Nanovic. Sadly, Bob and Liz cannot be with us in person tonight, but they will receive the video recording and we are sending our grateful greetings. Bob and Liz have created our institute with an inspiring vision, have generously provided for our institute and for this lecture, and they have also supported the construction of Nanovic Hall. Thank you, Bob and Liz. They will like that. Yes. There will be lunch in the Elizabeth Nanovic seminar room afterwards. The Nanovic Institute's mission is to bring Notre Dame to Europe and Europe to Notre Dame. Today, we will connect Europe and Notre Dame through a person who has done a lot to forge transatlantic ties. He has worked wonders for his home country, Slovakia, and also for Europe. Our guest of honor, a Nanovic Forum speaker, Mikuláš Dzurinda, will speak for about 40 to 45 minutes, let's say 42 minutes, 16 seconds. Then we have a bit of time for some questions. We will end at 12:15. It takes a superstar to introduce a living legend. Dear Peter, may I please ask you to introduce our esteemed Nanovic Forum speaker, Mikuláš Dzurinda.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Clemens. Welcome to all of you, and I am tremendously honored to introduce the man whom I'm eternally grateful and appreciated for his contribution to my country and basically to safety, security, and peace in the whole region of Central Europe. To understand the historical context, you need to, the historical achievement and almost biblical accomplishment of Mikuláš Dzurinda and what he did for Slovakia, one needs to understand the Slovakia in the 90s. Slovakia was enjoying their newfound or first time found independence and sovereignty, and but there was a lot of mixed emotion, mixed different situation, but basically Slovakia became in the 90s very fragile, weak, and vulnerable. We kind of produced our leader who proved to be dictator identified by European Union and by all democratic, prosperous countries around the world. His name was Vladimir Mečiar, and instead of pushing Slovakia towards the West, towards the European Union, he tried to push Slovakia towards Moscow under the Russian influence. Situation at the time, is best described by certain information. We had close to 20% unemployment. Slovakia enjoyed terrible credit. When I was basically those days reading paper almost daily, Financial Times or Wall Street, and then when I read certain information, it just boiled the blood in me, because Slovakia needed to borrow 250 million US dollars. They got about 65 million, only small portion, and they pay 8%. Slovenia, which is slightly smaller country but very comparable, needed to borrow 100 million. They got 100 million at 4%, almost half. And that describes, and me knowing the situation and being kind of economically educated, and also having personal interest, it was unacceptable and very difficult to bear. And basic, as I said, the basic salary at the time was around 4,000 to 5,000 crowns, which translated roughly about $150, which you can consider poor. It was difficult those days, and country was run basically by the government that was directly connected to mafia. Mafia had their act basically, if not daily, weekly. There were machine gun shooting, car to cars, and killing each other like mafia had, or businessmen who refused to pay the fees to the mafia bosses, and so later it came to the knowledge of a population that these people basically were run and coordinated with Slovak intelligence services and other Slovak agency. So it really was difficult situation, and when you consider this, and those days also there was so-called privatization, which was the gigantic fraud committed on the because under the communist everybody owns everything. So like all the property of Slovakia belonged to the people. So they came up with the idea of privatization coupon, where every citizen got a coupon, and when he paid 1,000 crowns, that he could participate. But smart people, crooks, manipulated, swindled, and cheated citizens by promising citizens triple, quadruple, even tenfold for their privatization coupon. Trusting citizens, gave up their coupons. These guys got hold of management of the big companies, factories, real estates, and the companies that promised those threefold, fourfold, tenfold, they let it bankrupt. They got all the asset, people got nothing. And we created a kind of asset and riches of Slovakia that were supposed to belong to all of Slovaks, all of a sudden belonged to few chosen so-called oligarchs. So watching this, at the time I was ice hockey player. When I finished my career, I still traveled to Slovakia or to Europe about 4 times a year. And I always traveled through Vienna. I call it Slovak International. I got closer to the airport than some Vienna residents, because I'm there in 35, 40 minutes, which is better than many, many North American cities. And I know. So I watched the situation develop, and I was very, very kind of frustrated, unhappy. And few positives were happening in Slovakia was ice hockey. You know, we managed as a new country. I fulfilled my dream. You know, I wanted to Slovakia one day. I refused to play for Czechoslovakia. When I was invited, if I ever play, I said, I'm going to play only for Slovakia. That was very prophetic. I had no idea what I said. But a year later, all of a sudden there was a chance to create a new country, and January 1st, 1993, Slovakia came into existence. So I said, hey, we need to go. We have, in 1 year, there were the Olympics in Lillehammer. We need to get there. Now, how do you get there when Slovakia was relegated to the C pool? Because a larger partner, when you split countries, that's in the rules, inherits A pool and Slovakia C pool, and nobody ever played the Olympic from C pool. So we start political lobbying, and we were lucky, so we managed to get ourselves into qualifying tournament. That was in Sheffield, England. So I grabbed my brother. He was already 1 year retired. I said, no. You need to come back. Country needs you. He listened. That was great. And what happened, we started a winning tour. I nicknamed our national team the Slovak Dream Team after the US Michael Jordan and company in Barcelona in '92. And we had we were the top players. Peter Bondra played there and some other players. We didn't have that many, but that was the best what we had. And we were committed to get our country to Olympic Games. We won a few tournaments. We were beating the best team, and that was euphoric almost in my country. That's why I said it was probably one of a few positive things. And even pre-Olympic tournaments where there were countries like US, Canada, and Germany, we won the tournament. Olympic itself, after first round, after preliminary, just before playoff, Slovakia, there were 2 groups. In our group, we finished unbeaten. We were Cinderella in US media. They nicknamed our Cinderella story of the Olympics. When Italy, France, but mostly USA, Canada, and Sweden, like hockey superpower, finished behind Slovakia. So you can imagine the life in Slovakia. People were so proud, and so were we. So it really was very, very special. And those were the days when we met. The politicians realized that situation is horrible, unbearable, and we needed Slovakia to get to European Union because opportunity came up. There was expansion, and Slovakia had a chance. They were planned to increase membership by 10 countries, but they quickly realized that Mr. Mečiar is a dictator, and he's acting undemocratically. So we got expelled. And that was, to me, it was like somebody just backstabbed me. There was bad things happening and kind of piling up. And one day we were I was already after my career, but I was doing for Slovak television, commenting ice hockey in Zurich. And we got top 3 leaders from the opposition, led by Mikuláš Dzurinda. They approached us in Zurich and asking for the brothers to help the political parties to dethrone Mečiar. So my first answer became very, very famous because I said, what took you so long? I was just eager, itchy to help, to do anything, because I realized the danger that Mečiar posed for my country and for the future of Slovakia. So then the election came, and election was very, very tight. But because of talent, leadership, and political genius, somehow Mikuláš Dzurinda managed to coordinate opposition. made them sign the treaty that whatever happens, nobody will go with Mečiar. And Mečiar won the election, but he couldn't get 50% plus one vote. And if you don't get it in democracy, you lose the chance to create a government. So the second chance went to the leader of the opposition, of the second winning party, and there was opposition. That was Mikuláš Dzurinda and his coalition at the time. And it was tight, but we won. And we knew we have a long road ahead, but situation dramatically started to improve. Just the media, what was happening around the world, what I was reading almost daily, everything was negative. Mafia style, Mečiar, economic situation, high unemployment. There was nothing positive in the world media about Slovakia. When Mikuláš took the leadership and took the government, they went to work almost immediately. They introduced many, many reforms, including the economic reforms, including the flat tax, which made Slovakia immensely attractive. All of a sudden, there was one beautiful example when before we won the election, Slovakia had one foreign car producer, there was Volkswagen, and they made 40,000 cars. Out of 40,000, almost all of them were Polo and Golf. Small one, not profitable or very little profit. These days, Slovakia is producing million-plus cars, is the largest producer in the world per capita. And we have, Volkswagen is producing 300,000 plus, and mostly Touareg SUV, Porsche Cayenne, and Q7 Audi. Like very expensive, very high margin, so everybody is happy. Country is getting richer and richer, and a lot of good news were coming from left and right. Our credit right now is close to AAA, if not AAA. It's very, very, very high, very, very good. I don't know how long it will last because the crooks just won the election and former KGB apparatchik. So hopefully, 4 years or early they will leave and we get a proper government. But for now, and salary, people are making just because of Mikuláš reforms and political acumen and accomplishment of what he did, because we managed to, in 2004, that was I think in March, we entered the NATO, and in May we entered the European Union. And those were kind of a catalysts for global businesses and investors, and that's why the situation was improving dramatically. And at the end, like these days, which is, I don't know, 20, 25 years, in the US maybe salary doubled, in Slovakia went from 150 to almost 1,500, almost tenfold. So thank you for those elections, because without those elections, we could easily be like Lukashenko's Belarus. Because those days we had 3 dictators in Europe, was Lukashenko, Milosevic in Serbia, and Mečiar in Slovakia. So right now there is only Lukashenko, and if Mečiar would have won, all these privileges, benefits, and advantages we managed to achieve wouldn't be here. So you know that somebody is responsible for all of this. Usually buck stops with the leader. Leader was Mikuláš Dzurinda. So I am eternally thankful and appreciative for everything he accomplished for my country. And as I said, it was, when you look at it backwards now, it was just a beautiful fairy tale. And as I said, it was because of the leadership and genius of our Prime Minister. And with that, I will pass the floor to my wonderful and dear friend, Mikuláš Dzurinda. Thank you.
Dear Mr. Director Sedmak, dear Clemens, dear Peter, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I am extremely happy and honored to be with you today in Notre Dame. I heard a lot, but I have never been here. I am full of positive impressions, and many, many thanks for this special and unique experience. Dear Peter, many thanks for your lovely words. Peter is a very gentle man with one problem. He likes to exaggerate, especially when it comes to his friends. And he's very, very modest to add that in 2002, he led the country ice hockey team to win for the first time the World Ice Hockey Championship in Göteborg, 2002, gold medal. And 2 years later, in 2004, we won, under his leadership, the first European elections. And Peter spent 2 consecutive terms in Strasbourg and Brussels. What a great and impressive combination to be an ice hockey star and so good politician. Peter, thank you. Now let's jump into our business. I was thinking how to symbolize the challenges which I'd like to talk about, and then I decided about a special word, demos. You know very well that demos is a word coming from ancient Greece, and it means common people. I like common people. I am a Christian Democrat, and we want to serve common people. But in this case, this word represents 5 initials that symbolize the main challenges we face on the both shores of the Atlantic. D as defense, E as economy, M as migration, O as oxygen, which is a symbol of the environment, healthy environment, and we need to talk about the green transition as well. And last but not least, as societal challenges at the helm with culture wars, which we wage in our societies in these days. So let's begin with the D, defense. On Thursday, October 19th, after returning from Israel, President Biden delivered his night address to America and its citizens. Among other things, he said, "We can't and will not let terrorists like Hamas and tyrants like Putin win. I refuse to let that happen." It was impressive. In this short paragraph, the US president has defined a challenge that is crucial in these times. Crucial for our entire democratic alliance, but also for the overall democratic world. Russia's war against Ukraine, the barbaric terrorist attack by Hamas against Israel, but also the insanity of several terrorist groups in Africa, particularly in the Sahel region, but also in the Middle East, represent the greatest challenges for the entire international democratic community. I consider tackling this security challenge to be the most important task for the democratic world in the years to come. This mission is complicated by China. Beijing has tightened its control over Hong Kong in recent years, diminishing the hope that this financial center will ever become a full-fledged democracy. China poses a permanent threat to a democratic Taiwan. It seeks to dominate the South China Sea throughout which around a third of the world's shipping passes. Huge oil and natural gas reserves are believed to lie beneath the seabed of South China Sea. China seeks a global domination in all areas, in economics, in technological sphere, but also in military. In its aggression, Russia can rely not only on China, but also on Iran, North Korea, and some other states dependent on China. Thanks. If I am boring, I am helping myself with some kind of... These countries, not only China, but also Iran, North Korea, and some other countries, are helping Russia mitigate the effects of the economic sanctions and supply it with weapons. This fact is not only unpleasant for Ukraine, which is trying to liberate the seized and occupied territory, but also for us, the Western allies. Russian propaganda, as well as our domestic conspirators, are using the aid that our countries are providing to Ukraine for various provocations. They are trying to distort the facts and present the aggressor as a victim of the expansionist policy of NATO and above all of the United States. Such distortions of the facts are nothing more than a cynical demagoguery aimed at scoring political points for the perpetrators of this propaganda and disinformation in our home countries. You know, elections are won not only through serious politics, by respecting agreed rules, but also by lies, demagogy, disinformation, and more by populism. Ukraine's problem is that in 2014, it decided to integrate into Euro-Atlantic economic and security structures. It made the decision on its own, freely, courageously, just as the citizens of my homeland, Slovakia, decided in the 1990s, as Peter rightly described. Viktor Yanukovych was president of Ukraine at the time of Maidan. Maidan is the name of the main square of the capital, in Kiev. Maidan is the symbol of the democratic revolution of the Ukrainian people in 2014. He claimed to be leading the country towards integration into EU and NATO, but in reality, he behaved like a Russian agent. When the people of Ukraine saw through this, massive public protests took the streets, and President Yanukovych decided to flee the country for Russia. We, the Slovaks, had a similar leader. It has been described. A leader who represented the fifth colony of Moscow and led Slovakia into international isolation. When our neighbors, the Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary, were joining NATO and starting negotiations on joining the EU, Slovakia was paralyzed, isolated, and excluded from integration processes. Our Maidan, our silent, bloodless revolution, was the parliamentary elections in 1998, in which citizens of Slovakia decided for the western direction of the country by a constitutional majority. When I asked the then US President, Bill Clinton, to join NATO, it was in March in 1999, his first reaction was, "I'm sorry, Prime Minister, you missed the train." It took us a lot to convince our allies that it would be beneficial also for them taking us in, that we would bring an asset to the international community. So I can give my personal testimony. It was not the United States that pushed us into NATO. It was us, the Slovaks, who pushed and prayed for NATO membership. The story of Ukraine is absolutely identical. It is not the United States that is dragging Ukraine into NATO. It is Ukraine that freely, independently, but with a vast majority of the population, decided on its Western aspirations. Of course, Putin and his kleptocracy are terrified by that. The idea that poor Ukraine would begin to rise and outperform Russia in quality of life must be a nightmare for Mr. Putin, but also for the Oral Kremlin and the Russian kleptocracy. And that is why Russia finally intervened by force. Russia's war against Ukraine represents a major challenge for us, the EU, but also for US, UK, and our allies. People are dying in Ukraine. Helping Ukraine is costing our countries a lot of money. However, we must sacrifice this money so that the evil coming from the Kremlin doesn't spread any farther. But also because there is much more at stake in Russia's war against Ukraine. What and why? Because this war is gradually transforming from the aggression of one country, Russia, into a global geopolitical contest between the West and the East at the helm with China. China is the main beneficiary of the war, able to buy discounted energy from Russia and supply Moscow with the drones and other weapons. By Bloomberg News, from the 8th of September this year, Russia expects to sell its gas to China at almost half the price for Europe and Turkey in the next 3 years, according to the economic outlook to 2026 presented by Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. So it is an official figure. Last year, 2022, China was buying energy from Russia at 28% of the world prices. 28% of world prices. I'm afraid, or it seems, that China will feed Russia for as long and as much as needed to protract the war, profit from it, and weaken the West. This is the game of Mr. Putin. China's aim is that the longer the war of Russia against Ukraine lasts, higher are the chances for fatigue and cracks within the Western community. And this is a common goal of Mr. Putin and Xi Jinping. However, despite all these difficulties, I am convinced that the one who is getting the short end of the deal is not Ukraine, it is not us, but Putin's Russia. Above all, because Russia is gradually becoming a vassal of China. In mid-October, in the week when President Biden delivered above-mentioned address to the American nation, Russian President Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping met in Beijing to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. During his trip to China, President Putin was told by Xi Jinping, the trust between China and Russia is deepening. Let's translate this phrase into a political message. We Chinese are happy to buy your energy no one else wants on the cheap. happy for you to prolong the war and rely on us more. Happy to have you as vassal. President Xi Jinping then called on Putin to make a common effort to ensure international justice. Read, let's rule the world under the China's flag. Dear friends, Saturday, on the 7th of October, brought another catastrophe to the world. An unprecedented terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel. No one knows what the ultimate consequences of this attack on the countries of the Middle East and the wider international community will be. One thing is certain. Unless the parties involved don't have the will to find a political solution to the relationship between Israel and Palestine, the people of the affected territories will continue to suffer. The settlement of the conflict between Israel and Palestine is a solution to squaring the circle. To search for a solution, however complicated, must not be accompanied by barbarism and by killing civilians, such as that perpetrated by Hamas when more than 1,400 defenseless, unsuspected Israelis were killed. The Hamas attack deserves the condemnation of the entire democratic world. So, my dear friends, I devoted plenty of time to defense because I consider this challenge is the most important. And now, let's go go on to another challenge, which is represented by economic competition, and all relevant areas. It is obvious that the EU and the United States should succeed in an increasingly growing competitive in the global economic environment in which our nearest and greatest rival is, no surprise, China. The long-term economic growth outlook published by the OECD and the International Monetary Fund gives China better prospects than either the US and the EU. These trends, you can see these trends on the picture, need to be reversed. China continues in its policy of subsidies and aggressive assertion. The OECD has warned, for example, that the global steel market is facing growing overcapacity, which is attributed to Chinese investment in a new production capacity, particularly in Asia. It is natural and right that the United States and the EU should seek for a deal to create a green steel and aluminum club that would exclude metals from China. It is also important to point out that in addition to building up new defense against China's steel, the EU has recently launched an anti-subsidy investigation into China's electric vehicle makers. Both the EU and the United States should continue to push China towards a level playing field for our Western investors and traders. It is important to push China to accept and respect the rules of mutual trade. Ultimately, however, this is not enough for success. We need to invest more and more in our education, not only in our universities, but also in public education. I mean lifelong education. We need to invest more and more to science and research. It is a big challenge, especially for us Europeans. Excellent research should be organized and therefore financed at a common communitarian level. We need new common, own European sources of income. In your country, in the United States, the federal budget represents 20% of all tax revenues from citizens and businesses, slightly more than 20% of the global national income. Whereas in the EU, it is just slightly over 1% of GNI. Huge difference between America and the EU. In other words, the project of a united, integrated Europe in the form of a political union, whether in a form of confederation or a federation, is far from complete. The challenge of surviving in the global economic competition must be addressed in close connection with the green transition. Protecting the environment is not just a matter of bans or restrictions. Environment protection represents first and foremost a need of massive investments, both in renewable energy resources, but also in machines and technologies, from cars to blast furnaces in our steelworks to heating equipments in our houses. The green transition, therefore, represents not only a key epoch in our efforts to combat global warming, protect drinking water resources, forests, and the agricultural environment, but also an epoch of innovation, support for startups, artificial intelligence, and state-of-art technology. Those who succeed in this transitional era will also succeed in the struggle for prosperity and quality of life. This is an extremely important challenge, the importance of which is underlined by two unpleasant trends that we are facing not only in Europe, but also in the United States and also in China. Low birth rates and aging population. It doesn't seem to be in the power or capacity of politics to reverse these trends. Therefore, we have to focus on what politics can influence: the quality education, the promotion of innovation, and the application of new technologies. So it was the second letter of my 5 priorities. Number 3 is M, also important: migration. This challenge represents a relatively separate issue, but again, facing both United States and Europe. To some extent, this is a phenomenon that is beneficial for our countries, especially in view of what I mentioned just a while ago: an aging population and a declining or stagnating birth rate. As both trends are causing labor shortages in our markets, especially the quality ones, capable of performing more sophisticated activities. The labor shortage can be solved to some extent by managed immigration. The problem is that it is very difficult to separate controlled or regulated immigration from illegal one. In addition to people fleeing war or terror, there are more and more people in our neighborhood who want to get out of poverty and live better. It is very natural. It is easy to understand. These people want to enjoy a higher standard of living that is available to them either in countries of the South America or in Africa. A significant proportion of these people face not only language barriers, but also a lack of proper education or ability to pursue a particular profession. It is also true that with the massive immigration to our countries, in Europe since the outbreak of the civil war in Syria in 2015, the level of crime has also been increased. Along with refugees and people who want to escape poverty, criminals are entering our territories as well. Very regularly, you can read about terrorist attacks in Sweden, Germany, in Brussels, in many other European cities and countries. And not seldom, these crimes are being perpetrated or committed by people coming from Muslim countries. Illegal immigration is becoming a serious political and social challenge. Clearly, it is not only economic security challenge, but also a cultural and overall political challenge. The clash of cultures, religions, but also prejudices in our countries is leading to tensions and increased polarization inside our populations. And this is fantastic food for the nationalists, extremists, and populists. We should honestly admit that the absorption capacity of our countries to receive immigrants has its limit. Friedrich Merz, the leader of the German CDU, Christian Democratic Union in Germany, for example, said in Neue Zürcher Zeitung interview very recently, 2-3 weeks ago, that, a very brief quotation, if there are refugees from Gaza, then these are initially an issue for the neighboring countries. Germany can't absorb any more refugees. We have enough anti-Semitic young men in the country. The end of the quotation. Friedrich Merz, very serious man, I know him, very humble man in these days. Such a statement, made probably by a future German chancellor, shows how serious the topic of immigration has become in the continent, in the EU. And I am not mentioning countries, including my own Slovakia, where people have a little experience of living with citizens of a different culture, especially of Islam. Solving the problem of illegal, uncontrolled immigration so that it is regulated, so that it meets human criteria, requires a joint, coordinated effort by our countries, but also strong political leadership. And also courageous, open, honest communication of political leaders with our citizens. Because it is impossible only to refuse. Everything, we tend to refuse everything to control our external borders because it is costly. It requires a lot of people. On the other side, we are afraid to address the root causes of migration, especially in vulnerable African countries. And last but not least, we are not capable enough to carry out an effective readmission of persons not granted either asylum or resident permit. Only in the combination of these three elements, effective protection of our external borders, also with our willingness and ability to address the root causes of the migration, and an effective readmission of persons to the countries of origin, only in the combination of these three elements we can succeed. My dear friends, I am well aware of the social costs and political risks of our country's effective response to the phenomenon of illegal immigration. However, I am quite certain that these risks are much smaller than the passivity or lack of action to date. And I realized very well that this is also the challenge in this country, in the United States. So, my dear friends, from security, economy, the environment, and migration, I come to the last challenge. Huge polarization of our societies. This phenomenon has one thing in common in our countries: the division of a significant part of our societies into two camps, two clans, or if you want, two gangs. You are either an extremely conservative or you are an extremely progressive. Nothing in between. These two clans wage culture wars. I mean, here in this country, but also in the EU. Very, very difficult, very strange culture war. Allow me to be as frank as possible and to tell that I find this war stupid. Stupid, but also untrue, not perspective, and unpromising. It seems to me that a significant part of our population, both in the United States and in the EU, is being pushed into one camp or other one by politicians, but also by a significant part of media. Activism of various kinds is being promoted in politics. Some people are campaigning in favor of the LGBTI plus community or in favor of the woke ideology. Others are campaigning in favor of religious doctrines. For example, for a total ban on abortion. Both camps are thus squeezing out of politics the issues that belong to the politics: creation jobs, social inclusion, support for disabled people, public safety, education and health, environmental protection, and many others. The clannish, activist approach to politics violates the conscience of many people who don't want to belong to this or that camp or clan because they know it is wrong or disadvantageous. Honestly, I belong to these people. Throughout my political life, I have advocated for what I advocated in my private life: the right of each person to decide on matters related to his or her worldview, strictly, individually, independently, freely, in accordance with his or her conscience. I consider myself a Christian Democrat, such as Helmut Kohl was, the former German Chancellor, the mastermind not only the German reunification, but also the overall European reunification, or Angela Merkel, his successor, or at least I think so, like Ronald Reagan, both Bushes, or John McCain. I am a moderate, tolerant Catholic. On cultural, ethical issues, my compass is the Christian 10 Commandments, even though it is not very easy to stick to them, right? All the time. When it comes to economic matters, I am generally liberal. I like the free market. I like competition, not only in ice hockey, not only running marathon. I am not ice hockey player. I am a marathon runner. I did my New York marathon after the fall of Twins in 2021. I like competition. I consider competition to be a very healthy principle. At the same time, I like the save and invest principle much more than the borrow and spend principles. Again, save and invest, not borrow and spend. I am a Christian Democrat. So please tell me, or help me, which clan should I belong to? The conservative one or the progressive one? I wouldn't feel comfortable in either. I feel comfortable in the center, and from the center, slightly to the right. And I'm determined to do everything I can to make sure that the broad middle remains, so that we don't get squeezed by activists from both sides, who I often consider extremists. So especially young people, ladies and gentlemen, you can ask me now, is there a method or a principle, a tool that I, as a young man or young lady, could follow when I face choosing my life or political orientation? Is there such a principle or a method? In my opinion, values are such a method, principle, or tool. The values of Judeo-Christian teachings, but also the values of secular humanism. On the highest pedestal of these values is freedom. Freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of choice in connection with responsibility. Don't let this freedom be taken away. I spent half of my life in the communism, and this is very serious. Don't let freedom to be taken away, neither to demagogues on the one hand, nor to unlimited modernists on the other. By the way, not so long time ago, I read an interview made by one of the progressive representatives in my country, and this gentleman said, "Oh, Mr. Dzurinda is a good politician, good man, but in this digital era, he reminded analog." I was thinking for a while, and then publicly answered, "Sir, tell me please, what is a digital version or a digital edition of the Ten Commandments?" I'm still waiting for his answer. My dear colleagues, I feel very strongly that in these complicated times, all of us on both sides of the Atlantic, without the distinction of faith or political affinity, should bet on the unity of our transatlantic community. In these turbulent times, I often hear that we Europeans need to build strategic autonomy in the economic sphere, but also in the sphere of foreign affairs and security. True, there are certain areas in which we, the EU and the US, must not be dependent on China or other global players. But let's build this strategic independence together, the United States and the EU, because if strategic autonomy is needed in some areas, I strongly believe that we should build and develop the Western strategic autonomy instead of European strategic autonomy or the America First principle. Such an approach requires mutual understanding, mutual empathy, and receptivity. It is great that we, the EU and US, are united around Ukraine in these times. I believe we will speak with one voice in the case of Israel. At the same time, we Europeans must stand with the United States on the Taiwan issue, firmly, unequivocally. And finally, we should patiently build economic and trade relations between the US and the EU. In the autumn edition of the Foreign Policy magazine, I read an article entitled, "The Alliances That Matter Now," with the subtitle, "Multilateralism is at a dead end, but powerful blocs are getting things done." We can agree or disagree with that, but I am happy that my country and the EU are a part of such a powerful bloc, a part of the Western community. At the very end, I would like to underline the meaning of our shared values once again. Universal shared values are a backbone that unites us. This is a fiber that holds us together, that helps us understand each other, to live with each other. I miss the emphasis on shared values a lot these times. After September 11, after sending our troops, I sent also our Slovak troops both to Afghanistan and to Iraq. I spoke repeatedly to President Bush about the idea of advancing democracy. I believed it was possible to advocate democracy to the Middle East, to the north of Africa. Today, I doubt it is possible. But what is possible and needed is to promote our values. It will also be possible to promote our values in the South, in the East, at the end of the day, I believe, also in Russia. Sooner or later, it will also be people in Russia that will realize that freedom is better and more perspective than tyranny. Because in freedom, there is also an opposition. There is civic society. And there is also public scrutiny that help minimize mistakes done by ruling elite. And this is why that at the end of the day, we, the Westerners, will succeed. I strongly believe in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister.
A bit longer, yeah?
No, the way it works is we have 11 minutes and then everybody should be free to leave. And since people are sitting as they are squeezed in, I have to make sure that we are done by 12:12. So we have 8 minutes. That means we have time for 2 questions. And I believe Mr. Prime Minister is a gentleman. You will not run away. If there are more questions, you can ask Mr. Prime Minister personally here on the stage. So I will open the floor. If there are, I will take 2 questions. Number 1 is students' questions. Wonderful. Wonderful Morgan is bringing you a mic.
Hi.
If you could just introduce yourself with 1 sentence, please.
Hi, my name is Spencer, and I study political science. I was wondering how strong democratic institutions are in Slovakia against the rise of populism, like in against in Poland and Hungary, especially now under Fico. How strong are they against that sort of populism?
Thank you, sir, for following our domestic situation so closely. I am asking, or I am putting such a question to myself on a daily basis now, because I was taught that democratic institutions are the substance of our democracy and our resilience. May I answer very openly? After the raid on Capitol, do you remember the 6th of January? I have some doubts. We will see. The business has not been finished yet, also here in America. But there are some doubt whether our democratic institutions are really so strong. I believe in it, also in this country. But we will see at the end of the day how all these difficulties will be managed. When it comes to Slovakia, we are a young democracy. You know very well, since 1993, this is not so much time behind us. Next year, we will celebrate, commemorate, or mark the 20th anniversary of joining both NATO and the EU. In general, I would say that there is maybe something which is even stronger than democratic institutions, society. We are very strong when it comes to civil society. Maybe you heard about the murder of a journalist and his fiancée, Jan Kuciak, 2 years ago. We faced a huge demonstration, and the current prime minister had to resign at that time. The squares, the streets were crowded, full of people. So I strongly believe that if something happens in this direction, running against democratic principle, civic society will stand up and fight to defend this principle. The situation in my country is gloomy, but so far, thanks God, Fico is not so stupid and courageous to cross the red line, so far. So I strongly hope that it will continue. It will continue, and democratic forces, especially NGOs and people of my hope, will defend the basic democratic principle of Slovakia. I believe in it.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, a public question. I take the student here, Notre Dame student here. If you can throw the mic over here.
Clemens, one exception, the last row.
Hello, I'm Patrick. I also study political science. My question was, how did you sort of keep hope in sort of democracy and things getting better, having went during the times of communist dictatorship and the creeping authoritarianism during the 90s and even today with Russia's invasion and growing populism in Europe?
You mean how to defend what should be done in democracy, right?
How to keep up hope.
Keep up hope, yeah, okay. Now, this is a fundamental question, and I am afraid that
Yes, please.
I am afraid that maybe I'm not able to give you a better answer than my whole life experience that everything is inside of us. Everyone matters. Every single citizen matters. I spoke about our democratic institutions, but also about our NGOs. Media are strong in Slovakia as well. We are not hungry, thanks God, so far. So as we did together with Peter and many other freedom fighters in 1998, if something happens, we will stand up and we will fight. What we can, we can talk to people openly, that we are still here, to remind them that it is much better to defend democracy, however not perfect it is. We need to talk courageously to people. I'm a bit nervous in Slovakia in these days because I miss such strong defenders as people from my generation were. And not only politicians, but also people from culture. I would say elite, even though I don't like this expression elite. But visible people, known people, respected people, all these people should watch and should talk to people openly. We are here. We will never accept a huge relapse to the past, to the form which we remember from the time of communism. All these voices are substantial. I provoke these voices. I call on these people to stand up, to be visible, heard, vocal. This is the substance of democracy, I believe.